and Development. Now remember, on Friday, the Central Bureau for Direct Taxes, or the CBDT, proposed a roadmap to bring corporate tax down from the current 30% to 25% by doing away with the tax breaks to India Inc. One such proposal is to reduce the tax exemption offered on investment made for scientific research from the current 200% to 100%. And this has not gone down well at all with the pharma industry. Joining us now for her point of view is the chairperson and managing director of Biocon, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. Kiran, thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18. You've of course taken to Twitter to put out your angst there in the public space as far as this proposed move is concerned. And I say proposed because this is only a draft at this point in time, and the government has invited opinions over the next 15 days on its draft proposals. But Kiran, why are you so surprised? Because remember, in this budget, the finance minister had very categorically stated that exemptions would be done away with in a calibrated fashion, but at the same time, the corporate tax rate would be brought down from 30% to 25%.
Well, you know, Shireen, in my view, both are mutually exclusive, okay? First and foremost, our Prime Minister is really pitching for an Invest in India campaign across the globe. And it is ironical that you basically start announcing at the same time a phasing out of tax exemptions and tax incentives. I find this very, very ironical. I find this a measure that will only be detrimental to investment, especially when we are competing with other economies that have very attractive, tax regimens and tax incentives for investment. So this is not something that we can really accept as an industry and as a country. In fact, I'm very surprised that, the government actually, the CBDT, has not even taken on board serious objections from DIPP, DST, who are all not in sync with this proposal. So, the finance minister might have made a statement, but I don't think it augurs well for the economy. I personally believe that the bureaucracy should certainly not try and derail what we want to do with economic, progress and boosting the economy in terms of investment.
Let me ask you about specifics. Okay, so let me ask you about specifics, Kiran, because you've said several things. You believe that this is a retrograde move on the part of the finance ministry and the government. You believe that this is the bureaucracy hijacking or derailing the government's economic agenda. And you've also tweeted to say that this will in fact sound the death knell as far as the biotech industry is concerned. I mean, those are serious comments. The government would suggest at this point in time that perhaps industry is being alarmist.
It is not alarmist, Shireen. First and foremost, let me tell you, even the 200% weighted deduction that we were being offered to in terms of R&D, believe me, was only covering 10% of our R&D spends, okay? We kept saying that we should be allowed to claim 200% weighted deduction on our global R&D spend. But that was something never considered. And now even that 10%, you want to reduce it further to, half of that? I mean, it's ridiculous when every other country in the world is offering huge tax credits for research. Why would we want to then invest in research in this country, especially when the Prime Minister is actually talking about innovate in India as a big mission? I mean, it doesn't make sense. And I think the DST is not at all seized of this approach.
Okay, Kiran, let me ask you now.
The government needs to understand the importance of investing in R&D.
No, you're absolutely right on that front. But let me ask you for specifics again, Kiran, because you've obviously, on the back of the proposal that was announced on Friday, done some back-of-the-envelope calculations on the kind of impact this will have as far as companies like yours are concerned. What would be the hit of this halving as far as the deduction is concerned on Biocon, for instance?
For instance, Shireen, there is no incentive for me to do R&D in India. I mean, basically, you will see a flight of R&D out of this country. You will see people, creating IP outside this country. You will see people really sort of, taking their R&D in more attractive destinations where R&D credits are available. So I think this is an extremely retrograde step at a time when we need to actually attract people to come and innovate in India. So according to me, the government, I don't think, is seized of all the facts And I think there needs to be a serious thinking and a serious rethinking about this particular proposal, where I, for one, certainly believe that this is going to be an extremely retrograde step for India Inc., especially for pharma and biotech.
Okay, so you're saying an extremely retrograde step, but let me also ask you, Kiran, then to extend that point, because the finance minister as well as the prime minister have been touring country after country trying to invite people to invest in India. We've sold the Indian IP story abroad, saying that, listen, don't worry about our patent regime, we're TRIPS Plus compliant. Do you see investment coming in, big ticket investment coming in, if this goes through into the pharma sector?
I don't think so, Shireen, because investments are made where the tax regimens are very attractive for IP and for research and innovation. Now, if you think about the Pfizer-Allergan deal today, why was that done? They wanted an Irish domicile because the tax regimen actually favors pharmaceutical companies, especially those that innovate. So if you can't take a cue from that, and if you think that everyone is going to rush into India just because you assure them of a good IP regimen, well, think again.
Kiran, are you now going to seriously consider, and again I'm saying if, because this is still a draft proposal, but if this does go through, will you be forced at Biocon now to consider other domiciles as far as R&D is concerned?
Well, certainly every company that is involved in research, and remember, research is inherently high risk, and therefore you do need, tax credits to really support this kind of gestational research, which takes years to get into the market. So if you don't get attractive tax credits for what you're doing, you will obviously explore other, destinations that offer you these tax incentives. So I really believe that the government needs to seriously rethink its R&D policy, its tax incentives for R&D, and I think it's important that they actually really engage into serious stakeholder consultation with the Department of Science and Technology, with the DIPP. I know both of them have actually objected very strongly to these measures.
What about the changes being proposed as far as special economic zones are concerned, Kiran? How significantly is that likely to impact the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector as well?
Apart from pharmaceutical and biotechnology, Shireen, I think this is a retrograde step again. I think DIPP has objected to this particular proposal very strongly because SEZ is a flagship for their investment campaigns. And if you're going to start, tinkering around with SEZs and doing away with tax incentives, I mean, what can I say? I really believe
no,
that...
but Kiran, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. On one hand, corporate India, for the longest time, has been saying, give us a simplified tax structure, do away with exemptions as long as you give us a simple, low tax rate. Now the government is moving down that road. Yeah, do away with some of the exemptions. Shireen, that has been the viewpoint.
Shireen, don't confuse simplification with tax exemptions, okay? I think we certainly need a simplified tax regime. We need clarity, we need predictability and transparency. Certainly that's one part of the equation. But on the other part, you cannot do away with tax exemptions and tax incentives, especially for many sectors which need it. So if you're going to have a blanket approach to taxation, the way it is being proposed today, I think it will really disincentivize investment and it will negatively impact investment. And don't forget, today we actually have a huge challenge. 60% idle capacity is what we are challenged with. How are you going to spur investment and spur that the capacity utilization going without incentives? So let's not confuse the two.
Okay, Kiran, my final question to you. Are you disappointed with the kind of economic thinking that the government seems to be pursuing? On one hand, it's make in India, skill India, digital India, invest in India. Do you believe that what you're finally seeing on the ground is not aligned to the government's efforts to try and draw in investment, whether it's foreign or domestic?
No, what I find is that there is a lot of good things happening. But there's also a lot of wrong things happening. For instance, you know, the freeing up of FDI in certain sectors is a welcome development. The DISCOM, you know, the financial measures that have been taken to free up the, you know, the loss-making DISCOMs is also a welcome, you know, development which the government has announced. But then on the other hand, suddenly they announce these phasing out of tax exemptions and, you know, weighted deductions on R&D, which is very, very disappointing. It's counterproductive.
All right, it's counterproductive.
So, you know, I
Let's see
just
if the
don't know
government
what's
is
happening.
Your final 10 seconds, Kiran. If the government is listening, if the finance minister or the DEA secretary, any of them are watching this show, listening to you, what is the final word that you have?
My request to the finance minister is please rein in the bureaucracy. Please make sure that they are in a consultative process with other departments within the government who I know don't share their particular view on this particular subject.
All right, let's see if the finance ministry is listening. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks very much for joining us with your take on what you believe is a retrograde move on the part of the CBDT and a move that you believe will hijack the government's efforts to try and draw investments into India. Thanks very much for your time.